So thank you for listening to the Mental Insights podcast. This is your host, Brennan Catuli, and we are here today for episode number 33 with Michael Dash. To start off, Michael, I think it's a great perspective to speak about your transition from moving to Utah and speak a little bit about how that transition played to the course of, what really drove you to move throughout not only your career, but just your mindset in general. So, originally, why don't you tell us what challenged you to move to Utah with only knowing one friend, and what kind of courage did you need to have in order to take that step and make that step forward within your own career and within your own life?
Yeah, so I grew up in New Jersey, went to college at the University of Maryland, and then went back to the New Jersey, New York area, got a job in New York, worked there for about 5-6 years. And I ran into a business opportunity that was out in Salt Lake City, Utah. I was in the staffing business, staffing recruiting. I was calling on E-Trade Financial. They said they didn't need any help in the New York area, but if I knew somebody in Sandy, Utah, that they were trying to hire 200 financial service representatives in 3 weeks, licensed Series 7 and 63. So I knew one person outside of the metropolitan area who was in recruiting, and she happened to be in Utah. So I was like, oh my God, this is like the stars are aligning. So I put together a bid with her on that project, and we ended up winning the bid. So that project, so I immediately took my 2-week vacation. I flew out to Utah. We put together a team. We pulled off that project. We filled 200 positions. From that, we got projects in Alpharetta, Georgia, Jersey City, and Tampa, Florida. And in 1 year, we had 800 positions filled. Now, this was my quote-unquote side hustle. You know how everybody loves to use the words side hustle these days. So it's not good. You can't just have a job. You need to have a side hustle, right? So this was my side hustle at the time. I was working for another company in New York doing recruiting. They didn't want any business outside of New York. So that's why I went to this other girl who I was friends with who was in Utah. So fast forward a year, one thing led to another, and my best friend who I was working with in New York ended up exiting the company he was president of to start his own company. And he offered me 30% to start the company with him. And the woman who I had done the deal with E-Trade, she was in Utah, and she was starting her own recruiting company, and she offered me 50%. So the way I ran my life and made decisions back then was strictly based on money. It was all cost-benefit analysis of where I would make more money. That's what I would do. It didn't matter about happiness or fulfillment. That's just how I ran my life. And 50% is greater than 30%. So I followed that line of thinking, and I decided to leave all my friends and family and everything I knew and move out to Salt Lake City, Utah, only knowing her to start this business, which was called Parallel HR.
Thank you for sharing that, Michael. I appreciate it. And it definitely puts into perspective of, how driven you are to make that leap after, only knowing one person and successfully, working through that side hustle, as you say, in such a short period of time. It shows the commitment that you had within that field of work. Within, making that leap, was there anything that was holding you back besides just, going and seeking out, whether it was, starting that company with her? Was there anything that was in your thought process of holding you back, whether it was any relationships, whether it was just the commitment, the move? What was there anything that was holding you back, or anything that was changing the course of, your own mindset, making that initial move?
The biggest challenge was, my best friend in New York and I had spoken about starting a company together for years. So we had been talking about this for years and years and years. So having to tell him I changed my mind and I am no longer staying here was probably the toughest thing, because at the time I wasn't in a relationship, so there wasn't a woman or a spouse, or there wasn't somebody that I was leaving, so that wasn't an issue. Um, and I was leaving my parents. That was a little bit of an issue, just letting them know they're getting a little older. But I feel strongly that everybody has to follow their own course and pave their own path to know if it's the right path for them. And so ultimately telling him was the toughest thing, telling my best friend. And I remember going in that day, I was kind of nervous. Even though he's my best friend, I've known him longer than anybody in my life except my parents and brother. I was still nervous of letting him down. Nobody likes to let somebody down, especially that you're close to. But it was a little rough for the first couple months, but then we smoothed things out, and he eventually understood. And the bottom line for me was, yeah, it was a money grab for sure. In my mind, I thought I would make more money there. But I also wanted to be, he was a chief and I'm a chief, and there's not really room for two chiefs when you're running and building a company, right? So from that standpoint, I think it was the right move. Now, little did I know that, it was 50% of, we built the company up in Utah to $5.5 million per year at the top. So I had 50%, $5.5 million. Or if I took the 30%, he ended up building his company to like $25 million. So little did I know that 30% of 25 million or 50% of 5.5 million. Yeah, I didn't have those facts at the time. Maybe my decision would have been a little different.
That's the luck of the draw of how it plays out. And I mean, it definitely can be seen that, you've been able to branch out and in many other avenues to, in my mind, create a lot of value besides just the monetary value. And, that's what I'd really like to speak about. And, the one thing being is the book that you released this year, Chasing the High, an entrepreneur's mindset through addiction, lawsuits, and his journey to the edge, can be seen as Michael's holding that right now.
Perfect product placement.
It truly is. And why don't you give us just a little insight into what motivated you to write this book, and tell us a little bit about, any either the feedback or just what you've been doing to promote this book throughout this past year.
Yeah, so I grew up with a background in addiction. I started gambling when I was 11 years old and had a 20-year gambling addiction. I also had, during that time, an 8-year cocaine addiction, where I was doing cocaine every single weekend when I was in college and in New York City. So I was gambling, but the gambling eventually wouldn't get me high enough. So then I needed to add cocaine on top of it. And that would get me to where I felt like I was at peak performance. But really, I was just at peak delusion. That's why I was in a delusional state. So I had those two addictions, which, I've been 14 years clean from gambling and
that's awesome.
7 years clean from cocaine. Thank you. But I also did a lot of other things. I was doing GHB. I was smoking marijuana every night. I just never considered that an addiction. Mm-hmm. Marijuana, it's not that big a deal, but that actually, whether it's a big deal or not, has nothing to do with whether it's an addiction, right? Mm-hmm. And when I moved to Utah, I actually discovered Adderall, which I had not been privy to. I didn't know anything about it. So I started taking Adderall in Utah, and I would crush work. Like, I would get so much done at work, but it changed my emotional state a lot. I would have these crazy emotional swings. And that affected how I treated my employees, how I led my company, how I showed up as a friend, how I showed up as a man. So that really turned into another 8-year addiction with Adderall. I was taking it every single day. It was the hardest of all the addictions because I was taking it every day. Yeah, I was gambling every day, but cocaine I was just doing on the weekends. And even though I was smoking, it was like I smoked at home to go to sleep and wind down. But Adderall I took in the office to get me going and to crush work and everything. And it really affected how I was as a leader. I was not a great leader. I could have been a much better leader looking back on things. And I take responsibility for everything, but it was all driven through that rush I would get from Adderall. And I started seeing a lot of different entrepreneurs going through the same struggles with addiction, different substances, different behaviors, but all in my entrepreneur sphere, basically. The people that, the entrepreneur organizations I was a part of, I would consistently see this. So I was hiding, I was lying, I was isolating. I wasn't really, everybody thought everything was great with me because outwardly that's what I portrayed, but internally I was really in a lot of pain. And I just decided, I need to talk about this. I see all these other people suffering too. I'm going to talk about it and I'm going to write a book. And that's what I did.
That's so awesome, Michael. Thank you for sharing that. And it's so great that you were able to see tangibly of, why you were to share your story and reach out, and how that was to, bring you to understanding why it's important to share who you are and what you went through. Within someone who is facing any type of addiction, as you said, you faced multiple, what is the mindset of someone who is struggling through any type of addiction, whether it's the mindset or whether it's their behavior? What is something that you could give a little bit of insight into someone who is facing one of those struggles?
Well, if somebody's dealing with addiction, they're most likely focused on feeding that addiction on a daily basis. The majority of their time is focused on getting high, or whatever that high is, right? It might be drugs, it might be gambling, it could be food, it could be, any shopping, like it could be porn, it could be, there's so many addictions out there, right? So let's just term them all as getting high when they're in the peak state, right? Because people can feel very similarly who have that shopping addiction to the way I felt with my gambling addiction, right? Totally different behaviors, but they're still addictions and we are still yearning for them at all times. Our mind is completely focused on how am I going to feel better, i.e., how am I going to get high? And these are the behaviors that would fill those endorphins up for us. Fill that, that burst of energy, or that, feeling you get making it, or the feeling you get from purchasing something, or from, whatever the case may be. So in the mindset of that person, it's usually very chaotic. It's usually completely focused on first thing, filling the addiction, and then taking care of all the other responsibilities in one's life.
And as you stated, through an entrepreneur's basically mindset or their approach, with how much their plate can be within, whether like you were doing recruiting for talent acquisition, and in other areas, whether it's sales or whether it's marketing, these are topics where somebody can work for 12, 16 hours and have a busy schedule. And like you were saying, some of the addictions can fuel their own work, which then can be even harder to get off of, because they could think that it's fueling how well they're doing within their job. And in that scenario, was there a defining moment that changed the way that you saw your addiction with Adderall? Or, was it just the defining moment of knowing that you were abusing Adderall?
Well, it was really how I was treating my employees, and recognizing that I wasn't leading from a place of leadership or empathy, and I was leading from a place of anger and correction. So every time there was a misstep or one of the employees didn't do something the way a client wanted them to, I would react in such a manner. It wasn't until I ran out of Adderall, and for 3 days I didn't have it. I tried to go to the doctor and get my prescription refilled. They told me I would have to wait 3 days. Like I started freaking out. I didn't know how I was going to live or what I was going to do because I took it every day. So I had 3 days without it. And the way I felt so much calmer and relaxed. In the office, when things were happening from a business perspective, I just calmly addressed the situation and calmly spoke to my employees about it and gave them constructive advice. And they actually said to me, "Is everything okay? Like, what's wrong with you today? Is everything okay?" I'm like, "Yeah, everything's fine." It was almost offensive. But it was, I started realizing, wow, I'm not on Adderall. I don't feel anxious. I don't feel like overly excited, overreactionary, over emotional. I don't feel any of that. And that's when I decided I'm not taking this anymore. It's changing. It took me all this time. And that 3-day revelation, just like that, as soon as it happened, then I recognized like this has been affecting the way I've been acting for 8 years. I'm done with it. And then I quit that day.
That's incredible. And how did you see the relationships with your employees change throughout this process? Did you see a better aspect within communication? How are those relationships changing throughout, that course of, leading off of Adderall and being your true self?
Well, I think I was more conversational, which led them to be more comfortable, which led them to increase their communication with me where they start the communication. It's not me always starting the communication with them. Like they felt more comfortable coming to me, even though I had open door policy and everything. It doesn't matter if you're a jerk. Nobody wants to come in and talk to you, right? But it was much more conversational, and I was able to communicate with them on a different level. And we had constructive solutions to the challenges that we had.
And on top of the improvement within relationships with your clients and within your employees, did you see a change within just how your company was doing? Did you see different trend lines based on how your employees were feeling differently based on how you were treating them?
Not necessarily, because soon thereafter I sold the company. But I think if it was for a prolonged period of time, I would have seen that. What I did see is, what I even felt beyond seeing, is I felt a different vibe in the office. I felt people were peppier, were a little more, positive, were more optimistic. So that I definitely saw, and the communication was just so much better. So we could, things wouldn't get hung up, and we'd be able to come up with solutions a lot quicker.
That's great. And, as you've made this transition of learning about an entrepreneur's mindset, through addiction, through all of these challenges that you face, what is one key lesson that you learned, whether it's from what you've written in your book or whether it's from, just the experiences that you had? What is a key lesson from, what you faced of addictive mentality through being an entrepreneur?
I think the biggest thing is it's never as good as it seems, and it's never as bad as it seems, right? And this isn't just in business or in addiction or in life. This is in life, not just business or addiction, right? Never as good as it seems, never as bad as it seems. Especially in addiction, we tend to live in the 8, 9s, and 10s, or the 0, 1s, and 2s. The challenging part is to develop a healthy life and live in the 5 and 6s. That's the challenging part for addicts. So, my biggest piece of advice is not to make emotional decisions. life, not just in business, in life, whether it's with your partner, whether it's with your family, whether it's with your coworkers, whether it's with your employees, whether it's with your business. Emotional decisions will set you back. So that's my biggest piece of advice. My biggest challenge, though, for I think an addiction, dealing with addiction, is living in those 4, 5, and 6s. Biggest challenge.
Thank you for that, Michael. I appreciate you sharing that, because there's definitely a lot that people can face as they go throughout, whether it's addiction or whether it's, stepping into a new business. These all cause many different changes throughout the course of our own life. Within the steps of what you changed and what you were able to help people throughout your own challenges, your own experiences, you created Fate. Can you explain a little bit more about Fate and share with the audience what drove you to want to create this and help share other stories as well?
Yeah, so first it started off as an interview series called Fate, F-A-T-E, From Addict to Entrepreneur, which is the F-A-T-E. And I interviewed former addicts who are now entrepreneurs and built multi-million-dollar businesses, because that was me. So I still do the interview series, and I write articles from that in Thrive Global and Medium. So anybody who's interested can go and find them in Thrive Global under Fate, F-A-T-E, From Addict to Entrepreneur. Great interviews with Joe Polish from the Genius Network, Mike Lindell, InventedMyPillow.com, Cas Marte, convicted drug trafficker who started a company called ConFit, where you're connected to ex-cons to keep you on your workout routine. Really cool idea. Anyway, all those articles you can check out there. But I built a 10-week mentoring program where I work with entrepreneurs and leaders who are dealing with compulsive behaviors that are holding them back from being the leader and person they want to be in their companies, with their families, and in their personal lives. And so I developed a 4-step process that worked for me and has worked for dozens of other entrepreneurs that I've been working with, where we take them through a phase of recognition, self-recognition, right? So the first most important thing is actually recognizing what behaviors you're involved with, and consciously sitting down and mapping that out. So we take them through, then we bring them to tap into the power of curiosity, because the power of curiosity helped change my life. What I mean by that is dialing it back to like when we were children and trying out activities in our lives that we've never tried before. And maybe we didn't try them because we had a friend close to us tell us it was stupid, or it's not gonna, you're not going to like it, or a family member or whatever. But we let somebody else's experience influence ours before we've ever experienced it. There's so many people who do this.
Definitely.
Try the activity out. What resonates with you might not resonate with your spouse, might not resonate with your mom or dad, might not resonate with your brother and sister. We drill down into tapping into that power of curiosity and getting them to try activities they haven't tried before, to find the ones that resonate with them, right? So again, starts with recognition. We move to curiosity. Then we move it into action, which is actually going out and trying these events. Could be hiking, could be a sound bath, could be a new instrument, could be, a workout routine, could be a million different things. I mean, it could be anything. So once you have that action and you find groups of people who enjoy doing the same things you do, and you join them in activities, then you can build connection. And from connection, you really build communities in your life. So it's a 4-step process of self-recognition through curiosity, into action, and then to connection. And it really allows you to flush out those negative compulsive behaviors in your life and incorporate more positive, activities that fulfill you, but also lead to building connection and community, because those two things are extremely important to have in your life during the ups and downs of, especially of entrepreneurship.
That's so great, Michael. Thank you for that. I really appreciate that you offered that course as well and moved beyond the interview process. It really speaks to, how passionate you are about helping people through your own experiences. I'll make sure to have the links towards your blog and your course so people can get more familiarized with that work, so they can see more about what you're doing and hear some of those stories. And maybe if someone listening is an entrepreneur that is facing addiction, maybe they can reach out to that program and speak with you, because I believe that's definitely something that many people can be assisted upon, and that is definitely tangible work that can help with.
Yeah, and it's not only addiction. Like, it doesn't have to be full-blown addiction. It could just be compulsive behaviors, like behaviors that you can't get out of your life for whatever reason, even though you keep telling yourself you're going to stop next night. That's the type of behaviors that I'm used to working with. It can certainly be addiction as well, because I have experience there. But, some people don't think it's reached the point of addiction, and maybe it hasn't. But you want it out of your life anyway, and you'll be a much better leader with it out of your life. So those are the types of people that I work with. And I'm willing to offer anybody who in your audience, a 45-minute consultation call. If anybody wants help, they can just email me at michael@michaelg-.com.
Awesome. We'll make sure to have that in the show notes, and people can go towards that email and reach out and get that consultation, because I definitely think many people listening will benefit from the conversation with yourself. Within the aspect of wanting to share other stories and wanting to move past sharing your own, what drove you to want to bring light into the aspect of what people have faced and sharing their own stories? Were you motivated after you shared your own? What was kind of the feedback when you shared your own, and did that leapfrog into sharing others?
Well, I've gotten a lot of support from my personal network, of course, as we would all expect from our personal network. I think the key is now reaching people outside of that network, right? And really spreading the message and spreading my program that is really helping change lives. It can be very overwhelming running a business. It doesn't stop. It's 24/7. And your spouse might not be able to resonate with that. And your kids might, if you have them, or your parents, or your friends. If they're not an entrepreneur, you can't explain it, right? You go home thinking about your payroll, your employees, your HR, your accounting, your taxes, your legal, operations, production, clients, internal staff. It goes on and on and on and on. So I wanted to speak for other entrepreneurs who might have compulsive or addictive behaviors, and they're not speaking because they feel if they're found out, then that's going to impact their business. Then clients are going to look at them a certain way. Then employees aren't going to respect them the way they feel they need to be respected to get the production. So they don't say anything. So I wanted to speak out to let them know that it's actually not the case. You get more support the more you reveal and open up. And especially as an entrepreneur and leader of the company, the more vulnerable you are from an emotional standpoint, letting yourself out there, the more credibility, not just credibility, loyalty that you're going to gain. Employees want to work for you because they see you have just as many flaws as any other person. Just because you own a business doesn't mean you have it all together, because most of us don't.
I love that perspective, Michael. I think that's 100% true. And I definitely think that can be seen throughout, many people's lives, especially within entrepreneurship. Within entrepreneurship, there's definitely the hard line in terms of, you can always continue to work and you can always have a larger schedule, especially as you were saying, you can go to bed thinking about X, Y, and Z about what you can do tomorrow or maybe what you can still do tonight. Within your work, have you always been an entrepreneur, or did you have some work within working under a company? Because I think that not only the lifestyle, but the mindset can change within that environment. And, were you able to pick up any different, lessons from working under a company to then bring into your entrepreneurship lifestyle? Or have you always been in the entrepreneurship role and in that, lifestyle mindset?
So my father was an entrepreneur, so I grew up working for him. However, I had jobs for companies, all until I opened up and moved to Utah. So when I was in New York City, first of all, in college, I went door to door selling home improvements. And if you ever want to be successful in sales, go door to door and sell something. Okay. It's the toughest job there is. But if you can be successful in that, you can be successful in any type of sales. So after I did that and I graduated college, I went back to New York. I was working for a sports advertising company for 4 years, the first 4 years of my career. And so I worked it was a small business, but I worked under a structure. And, I learned a lot there, a lot. And then I worked 4 more years with my good friend who I had mentioned to you before at a recruiting company. So I was working for somebody at that time. So when you asked, did I take anything from that? I did and I didn't. I learned a lot of things of what not to do from my first boss because he was just a complete jerk and he pitted employees against each other. But in the same sense, I don't know how much I learned. Like my father was an entrepreneur. When I worked for him, a lot of the things he did, I ended up doing, running my company. Like he was in a lawsuit. I ended up in a lawsuit. Like he was like he would yell at his employees and I would have problems communicating with my employees. I never yelled at him, but I had problems. So sometimes you just need to learn on your own. Doesn't matter how much advice you get. There's nothing like being in the trenches and learning firsthand. You're going to make mistakes, but it's all about resiliency. You get knocked down, you just got to get back up, and you take those mistakes with you and you move forward and don't make the same mistakes.
I love that. And I think that can play into, some of the aspects that we spoke about in terms of behavior and, within your transition of truly learning how to be an entrepreneur and working within having many employees under you. Were there any behaviors that you noticed throughout when you started, and were you quick enough to, be aware of them and try to change them throughout the course of, you becoming and being an entrepreneur? How were you able to understand some of the behaviors, whether it was communicating with your employee or whether it was, just like you were saying about the emotional responses that you've had, how were you able to become aware of those behaviors as you were working throughout being an entrepreneur?
A lot of the times I didn't care enough about the employees to actually spend time with them. I was all about just closing the sale, close the business, deliver for the client. And that's what I would beat them over the head with. And that's a terrible way to manage. It's a terrible way to manage. So when I was, though, aware of it, I would either pull the person in and speak to them and ask them how I could help them. Or, sometimes there's situations where one of my really most important employees is a woman, and she could talk to other women better than I could about certain things that they might have challenges with. So then I would leverage her so that I would put the employee in a position to feel comfortable to be able to speak. Sometimes they're not going to open up to the boss, right? but they'll open up to somebody else who they feel they can trust. And then I can try to help by supporting in a different way, not directly involved, but in another way. So that's kind of what I attempted to do.
Awesome. And, for someone who's in the position of being an entrepreneur, whether it's, starting their own business, for them facing an adversity, whether it's a relationship with an employee or a client, or whether it's securing a sale within their business, facing this adversity brings about a lot of challenges, especially within entrepreneurship, because like you were saying, you have to withstand that adversity and learn to overcome it and learn to make different routes, because you don't necessarily have the roadmap to really succeed within this business. So for someone who's listening, whether they started their own business or they're selling door to door, what is your key lessons or advice for them if they're facing adversity, if they have an obstacle right in their way? What are your steps in order to, overcome a challenging obstacle within your business, mindset, within your entrepreneurship role?
Well, I read a book from Ryan Holiday called The Obstacle is the Way.
I love that book.
It's a great book, and it's one of my favorite books because it's so true. I always would try to find shortcuts around the obstacles. I would always try to go under, around, over. But the way you meet and beat an obstacle is by facing it head on. There's no shortcuts in life. I've learned the hard way, right? So now there's smart ways to do things, and then there's more difficult ways to do things. Obviously, try to do the smart way, but you have to face the obstacle head on. And then you have to leverage the resources that you have to be able to overcome that obstacle. So whether it's relationships with experts in your life who might know more about the situation than you do that you're dealing with, lean on those people. Whether it's, whatever it is, but leverage what you have in your life to overcome. And don't be afraid to ask for help. I was always driven by my ego, and my ego would not allow me to reach out to people and ask them for help. And this was one of my biggest problems.
That's valuable advice. I think reaching out and, asking for help, whether it's for, a friend, or whether it's a colleague, or whether it's someone within the same, business, they certainly can change the course of, just even giving you some motivation and how to face that obstacle. That's certainly, a great way to go about it. Within, all of that you've faced, with all of the challenges that you've been able to overcome with starting a business, with selling it, what was your hardest obstacle to overcome? And also, what was the, I think, best appreciation, best moment that you had throughout yourself? Because, you faced a whole lot, but what was kind of that key defining moment within your entrepreneurship role that really stuck with you, that really helped you to really shape the person that you are today?
Well, I think I grew out of love of the company I was running. And that had a major impact on me selling the business and transitioning out of that, because I did not feel like I was making the impact on people that I could. Finding a software engineer who's making $100,000, $120,000 job was just not doing it for me anymore. I mean, the reason I did it in the first place was strictly because of money. And the principles and importance of certain things in my life shifted. And money wasn't number one anymore. I mean, it's like number three, number four. Now, don't get me wrong. We all need money to live, but we also need it to make impact. So I totally get that. But it's a different story when it is the same thing every time that's driving your decisions, and that's money. And so that was very dangerous. So when I fell out of love with the business, that's really when I decided I need to sell the business. Like, my heart is not in it anymore. Doesn't matter how much money that I'm making or I'm not making. I need to sell. And so that would be the, any advice I give. Like, you have to love what you're doing. Otherwise, you're going to burn out. There's so many people that are in jobs right now that they hate it. If you hate it, leave the job. Instead of making excuses why you can't, make excuses why you can. Instead of saying, well, I don't have another job lined up, release yourself from the tensions that you're dealing with now and then go find that job to line up. You have to have belief in yourself and the skills that you have, and then you'll be able to break free from those chains.
Thank you for sharing that, Michael. I appreciate that. And I think that's valuable advice for, anybody, whether they're an entrepreneur, whether they're just in a job or a career that they might not necessarily feel passionate about. It's certainly something to question, to reflect upon, and see what ways they can be most passionate or most impactful to others around them. Certainly within your book, Chasing the High, certainly within Fate, from addict to entrepreneur, these are all different aspects where you're able to impact and create, substantial change within other people's lives, and still creating, substantial change within your own. You're still leading such a great example for many others around you, not only within your close circle, but like you were saying, you're impacting people outside of your network. And by doing this interview, hopefully we can create an even bigger audience for you, and to really showcase, how you're helping people through, whether it's an addiction or whether it's a compulsive behavior, because these are something that many people are facing today. And it's something that everybody needs the support and resources to have. To really shape what you've experienced, to shape what you've learned today, this is a question that I like to ask my guests at the end of the show, to really encompass what they've learned and what they're able to leave the audience as an example of their own life. So I want to have you really put into perspective of, you have written a book before, but I want you to put in the perspective that you're writing a book about your whole life story, your whole life lessons of, the challenges that you face, but as well the highest of highs, what you've been able to achieve, what you are most proud about. For something to be the most impactful, for something to share to the audience, what would be one chapter of your life story that you found most impactful, or that you think would really stick well as a key message towards the audience? So share us a little bit about, one chapter, one key defining moment within your life, and give us a little glimpse as to why you think that was, so impactful within your own life, or maybe how that can be so impactful for ones listening to this episode.
I would say a trip I took to Bali 3 years ago, when I was on a retreat. I heard two people talk about living in a state of flow by following your highest intuition at all times. And if it's not a hell yes, it should be an F no in everything that you do in your life. And I never thought like that before, and I never was exposed to this type of thinking or practice. And I resisted it, but I ended up taking a course from these people, and Jackie and Justin, actually, and they have Flow Consciousness Institute online, if anybody's interested. It was a miraculous course that allowed me to clear out my limiting beliefs and implant positive beliefs, and really change my way of thinking and of making decisions. And that shifted the trajectory of my life, because I now was following intuition. Instead of making all the decisions with my head, was making them with my heart or my gut, or this energetic feeling that this is the right thing to do. And I started incorporating that in my life, and 3 years later, I'm a completely different person. I'm much more open-minded. And I think it's very important for anybody listening is to be open-minded about activities, about different practices, about different people you haven't been exposed to, races, religions, genders, whatever it is. be open-minded. That's how you learn in life. And that's how we accept others, and that's how we communicate in a better way.
Such valuable advice, Michael. I truly appreciate that message, and as well being on this episode of the Mental Insights podcast. I'm so grateful that we were able to find this time to connect and share your message and share the work that you're doing. I think that you're playing a vital role within people who, are facing a struggle within their own life, and you're a key example to how they can take a step from such a challenging part of their life and create something so beautiful. You were able to lead by example and show others that, there is not just the end of addiction. You can overcome that. You can make the step forward. And I think that's such valuable advice, because then you then translated that into a book and then into a program as well as an interview show to offer other people's stories. I'm so glad that I was able to learn more about what you're able to do and how much impact you're making within, the people that are facing struggles today. And I'm so glad that we were able to learn more about your own story and share that with my own audience. I think there's so much for us to continue to collaborate and work within, because so many people today are facing these challenging issues. And I think the work that you're doing is so great to help others to lead into a successful life, such as yourself.
Thank you. I appreciate that. And there's like a lot of lessons that I wrote in the book that I experienced myself. And there's a great chapter called The Habit of Habit Making, which is really important in our lives to continue to build strong habits into our life. And when they don't resonate with us anymore, tap into that curiosity, try new activities, and keep evolving as a human. And your habits should evolve with you. And that's all in chasing the high. And, I think there's some good stuff, good takeaways and everything, but I appreciate your words.
Thank you.
Yeah.
It was my pleasure, Michael. And you all heard it here. Michael Dash, find the book Chasing the High, an entrepreneur's mindset through addiction, lawsuits, and his journey to the edge. We'll have Michael's book within the show notes, as well as his interview show, Fate from Addict to Entrepreneur. And we'll have his program as well. So if you have an addiction, if you have a compulsive behavior, if you have anything that you want to stop and get rid of, Michael can help you through that. So, thank you all for listening to this episode of the Mental Insights podcast. And thank you again, Michael, for taking this time to speak with me and share more about who you are and who you are impacting today.
Thanks so much, Brendan.